The reason I wrote Ordinary Thunderstorms was really because of the river, first of all. I was vaguely thinking about writing another novel set in London, contemporary London, and I read an article in a newspaper saying that every year the river police haul out of the river 50 to 60 dead bodies, and that seemed to me an extraordinary number in this day and age. That's over one a week. And I thought of Charles Dickens, and I thought of Dickens's novel Our Mutual Friend, which starts on the river with a dead body being hauled out. And I suddenly saw there was a way of writing about contemporary London, very contemporary London, with the river and its sinister freight at the centre. So that's where it all began, this idea of the river, dead bodies, and the fact that there's still a kind of Victorian, Dickensian London just below the surface. It wasn't enough just to have London and the river and a potential death. You have to think who's dead, who killed him, and these questions lead you up all sorts of narrative alleyways and all sorts of narrative adventures. But slowly but surely the story emerges, and usually it's to do with things that interest or obsess me, things I've heard. I'm very interested, I now realise, in loss of identity. I must have written 4 novels that centre around this idea of can you change your identity? Do we have many identities? What would happen if you lost your identity? Do we all yearn to lose our identities and be other people? That, I think, has been at the centre of my last 4 or 5 novels. So this became one of the themes of Ordinary Thunderstorms, about a young man who, through no fault of his own, loses everything that makes up his social identity. And what becomes of him? How does he cope? Is there any way he can reinvent himself? Can he get his old self back? And in the course of exploring these ideas, I had to construct a fairly elaborate plot as to why this young man loses everything and why can't he get it back. And so I was intrigued by what went on with the manufacture of a drug and the promotion of a new drug and the phenomenal financial rewards that are available if that drug is successful. So that became the kind of narrative superstructure of the novel. That explains why Adam, my hero, loses his identity. And then, of course, he, in this fall through the different levels of society, from near the top, middle class, intellectual, to the lowest of the low, he encounters all sorts of people on the way. And so, in the course of writing this kind of neo-Dickensian novel, as Adam lands at the bottom of the heap, he tries to get out, tries to find an escape route, but on the way out he meets all kinds of strange low-life characters, and sort of succeeds at the end of the day. But it was a long and complicated business to construct the story of Ordinary Thunderstorms, but it has at its centre this question of what happens when you lose everything that makes you the person you are. I'm not an autobiographical writer. I don't use my own life as raw material for my fiction. I prefer to invent and make things up and use my imagination. But of course your imagination is fueled by your own experiences. I think, I do believe that at its centre the novel is about story and character. I think that's why we read novels, that's why we listened in the dim distant past to storytellers, because they engaged us with their narratives and the people that populated those narratives seemed real. And so I think it's incumbent on a serious novelist to try and make their characters as idiosyncratic and as non-stereotypical as possible. So when you think of a central character like Adam Kindred, in a way it was that sort of urge that made me make him a climatologist. I'm thinking of I often like to write about people who have different jobs from mine, and I had been quite interested in climatology, and I thought, well, that's a perfect profession for Adam. The person he falls in love with was sort of dictated by the story. and so I made her a policewoman. So it's a curious combination of necessity, which the story you're telling imposes on you, and an attempt to make it as real as possible. And so you're interested in, everybody is strange and everybody's odd and eccentric, I believe. We all pretend to be boring and straightforward, but it's a way of bringing out in fiction that essential uniqueness of every individual and what it is about that person that stays in the mind. So as a novelist, you're trying to do that, I think, when you create your characters, but they do come from anywhere, and some of them loosely based or composites of people I've met, or else somebody you see and walking in the street, you suddenly imagine what that person might be like, and off you go. I don't really worry about the morality of my characters very much, because people are, even good people do bad things, and none of us are perfect. And so I think that old line that goodness writes white on the page is very true. I think if you wrote a novel that was composed of really nice, good people, it would be mind-bogglingly boring. So actually, the devil has all the best tunes. So in a sense, the more morally suspect your characters, the more interesting they become. I don't believe, and in fact I feel very strongly that people who only read novels because they want to read about nice people and where everything ends happily ever after should stick to romance or fairy tales. I think if you're a serious novelist writing a serious novel about the human condition, you can't worry about, is this person nice, do I like him or her. They're portraits. So even my nicest characters will occasionally slip up, but that's only true to life, I think. Well, London is my home and has been my home for 20 odd years now, so it's the city I know best. And it's changed hugely in the 20 years since I came here, and for the better, I think. I think London is the most polyglot, multicultural, richly diverse city on the planet. I used to think New York was, but if you set New York and London down beside each other, London's diversity knocks New York into a cocked hat. So without any doubt, compared to all the other major cities I know, London has the most languages, races, cultures, and you can't do anything in London without encountering that strangeness, that foreignness, which I think makes it incredibly exciting. And I think that's why people are attracted to the city, because it is so culturally diverse. So I wanted to somehow reflect that in the novel, and particularly a novel that takes place today or tomorrow. It had to have that incredible richness. The other thing about London compared to other cities is that it's gigantic. I mean, there are huge cities. Mexico City is gigantic. Any major modern city covers the same square mileage as London. But what's unique about London, I think, is that there isn't just a historical centre and then streets and streets of boring suburbs. London, in its vastness, is as interesting on its rim as it is at its centre. And we are sitting here in Chelsea. If you go down the river to Woolwich, it's taken me 2 hours to get to Woolwich from Chelsea sometimes, but Woolwich was where Henry VIII built his navy. It's as much a part of London's history as Chelsea is. If you go north to Barnet or somewhere like that, or go south to Wimbledon, you encounter Londons that have been around for centuries. So it's got this huge size, but the interest and the history doesn't diminish the more you go away from the centre, which is true of almost every other city, I think. And that with its added to its cultural richness and diversity does make it unique.